Water is essential to every living thing. To exist, man requires a continuous supply of water. Springs furnish an accessible, continuous supply of water.
For the last decade, I've gathered probably 99% of all of my drinking water freshly from springs by hand. When I first started to try to find springs myself, I would just ask around, and what I found was that asking old-timers in the area where I live was the best method, because they often had visited springs as kids with their family and filled up their bottles then. Over time, those practices were kind of lost, but they'll usually remember the locations of those springs. What I found was often those springs had dried up or were no longer viable, were no longer publicly accessible. I went on to create a website, findaspring.com, and that's a database of springs all over the world that's been built by the users. You can either find a spring on the site, or you can submit a spring and we'll put that spring up on the site. That'll put that on a Google Map interface and allow other people to find it as well. You can use that site to learn more about the spring that you're visiting and hear user reports about it as well, and sometimes really helpful on-the-ground data about that location. Another thing I'll recommend is going into the local health food store. And what I found is people in the health food world are often a little bit more keenly aware of things like springs in their area. That's a great way to do it. Backpackers, hikers, outdoor shops, fishing shops, places like that where people have an outdoor lifestyle and an enthusiasm for the outdoors, they might know springs as well. And then another thing I'll recommend is using U.S. Geological Survey topographical maps, which will often show the locations of springs as well. You can also call up your town office, ask them if they know of any springs. We're in the White Mountains of New Hampshire right now and about to arrive at a spring that I think really typifies the kind of spring most people are going to visit. It's right on the road, so we can pull our car right up to it, and it's being used by people all the time. So you know it's safe water because people are using it really regularly. Springs like this one are fantastic because you can pull your vehicle right up alongside them. And that allows you to fill several bottles at the same time. So that way you can have several weeks of water, even a month's worth of water, saved up at home without having to go back and forth to the spring each time. Seeing this kind of configuration with a pipe coming out of the ground like this is probably the most common kind of spring you're going to find, especially on findaspring.com. Most springs like that will be easy access with a vehicle, and they'll have been set up with a little bit of infrastructure like this to facilitate filling bottles and making it easier for you to get in and out. Sometimes when you're visiting a spring like this, there'll be lots of people here lined up to fill their bottles. Some people just need to fill a small water bottle. So if you've got lots of bottles, be courteous. Let other people jump ahead if you're going to be there for a while. Strangely, there are people who will leave litter around a spot like this. That always surprises me. But don't be afraid to be the steward of your spring, to do a little spring cleaning. Pick up what you find, and let's keep these springs beautiful. Make sure they remain a wonderful resource for people in the future too. Occasionally you come across springs like this one that have been manicured and maintained in really special ways. I look at this hexagonally structured building, the beautiful granite basin. To me, this is how all springs should be. And I really envision a day when townships and cities recognize the value of the spring sources that they have, and they start to set them up as a public resource. And that's going to take some time, and it's going to take people living this lifestyle. But in the meantime, when I see something like this, it feels really good to me. And though this beautiful and historic spring has been wonderfully maintained, the only problem with it is it's maintained by a high school. And that means there's a lot of teenage kids at this source, and we don't know what they're doing in it. So I don't drink from this water except in the summertime when the kids are away. But I sure love visiting this spot just to see the real beauty and to see what a spring could be. This is one of my favorite types of springs. This is a granite basin, and it was built up in 1882. This was to sequester water for a bottling plant that was here at the time. And this water was actually sold off in carboys at about 50 cents for 5 gallons and a little over $1 for big barrels. This has since been abandoned, and now it's just a kind of scenic site in a local municipal park. Not many people drink from this spring anymore, but I've been coming in here and drinking from it. And one of the things I love about it is that this water turns over every 28 minutes. Think about how long it would take to fill a bathtub of this size, right? Probably about that long. So you can imagine that the water that's gushing up from inside is coming at least with as much power as your bathtub has when you turn on the spigot. So every 28 minutes, the water in this has been moved out and new water's infiltrated up into it. So you know that water's always turning over. So it'd be very difficult for this water to get contaminated with anything because it's constantly being changed over. A lot of times people are concerned when they see a spring like this one about the pine needles and the leaves that have fallen into it. We're so used to water that has been presented in such a hygienic way. I do want to remind you that water does come up from the ground, so all water at some point is in contact with the earth. Now I do want to point out too that people take supplements like humic acid, fulvic acid, which are the natural organic acids that are the result of the decomposition of forests just like this one. People also take supplements of probiotics, and more it's popular to take soil-based microbes. All that stuff is naturally in this water, but these are all beneficial substances and beneficial life forms. So we don't have to worry about leaves and pine needles as long as we don't have things like dead animals and decomposition of big macro life forms. But things like this, leaves, pine needles, totally safe for us to drink from this.